He was humiliated by the girl he loved for being fat and ugly. 3 years later, he did something terrible to get revenge. You will never imagine what he did. 3 years later, after they graduated from high school, the student was having a reunion. When the high school reunion came, Henry arrived in a shiny, expensive car. He looked nothing like the boy they used to mock. His friend Emily, the only one who stood by him in school, sat beside him, both of them looking stunning. As Henry stepped out, people gasped. Whispers filled the air. "Is that Henry?" They murmured in disbelief. Henry walked into the hall, his presence commanding attention. He looked around but couldn't find Sophia, the girl who had humiliated him years ago. After the reunion party, he stood up. "Where is Sophia?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Silence fell over the crowd. Everyone looked away, not daring to meet his eyes. The guilt of how they had treated him seemed to weigh heavy on them. Finally, Jenny, one of Sophia's close friends from school, broke the silence. She couldn't make it," Jenny stammered, her voice shaky. Henry's eyes narrowed. "Why not?" he demanded. Jenny's face paled and she whispered, "Sophia is in the village with her grandmother." The crowd murmured. Sophia? The billionaire's daughter? In a village? Wasn't she supposed to be studying at Oxford or Harvard? Henry's heart raced. Something wasn't right. "Take me to her village," he said, his voice strong and determined. Without hesitation, Jenny agreed. Henry, Emily, and Jenny got into the car, and the rest of the classmates, curious about what Henry would do next, followed. Some drove their cars, while others climbed into a bus, all wondering why the once almighty Sophia didn't show up. As they began their journey to the village, tension filled the air. Everyone wanted to know what Henry had planned. What had become of Sophia? And most importantly, what was Henry going to do when he finally faced her? The road stretched ahead, full of mystery, suspense, and unanswered questions. Henry, Emily, Jenny, and the rest of their classmates drove through a thick forest, the road narrow and quiet. The trees were tall, their shadows dancing on the ground as they passed. It felt eerie, but no one said a word. Everyone wondered why Sophia, the once rich and proud girl, was now living in such a remote place. Finally, they arrived in a small, poor village. The houses were simple, made of wood and mud. It didn't look like the kind of place a billionaire's daughter would be. They headed straight to Sophia's grandmother's house, a tiny house with cracked walls and an old roof. When they reached the house, the door was locked. Henry knocked, but no one answered. They looked around and saw a neighbor nearby. "We're looking for Sophia," Henry said. The neighbor squinted at them. "Who are you people?" she asked. "We're her classmates," Emily replied. The neighbor paused, then sighed. "Sophia isn't here. She's at the church. Today's her wedding." Everyone froze. Sophia, getting married? Henry's heart started beating faster. "Can you show us the way to the church?" he asked, trying to hide his emotions. The neighbor nodded and gave them directions. Without wasting any time, they all rushed back to their cars and headed to the church. The small village church was old, with broken windows and faded walls. As they walked inside, the air felt heavy with tension. The room was filled with a few villagers, and there, at the front of the church, stood Sophia in a simple wedding dress. But something was strange. Beside her was an old man, wrinkled and much older than anyone expected. Sophia was holding a ring, about to marry the old man. She turned her head, and her eyes met Henry's. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. There, walking in with his classmates behind him, was Henry. He looked so different, so strong and handsome. Unlike the boy she used to laugh at, her hands began to shake, and without realizing it, she dropped the ring. The room went silent. Everyone stared at Sophia, but she couldn't move. Her face turned pale, and shame washed over her like a wave. She felt small, trapped. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Henry, unable to face him. The shame was too much to bear. Suddenly, without saying a word, Sophia turned and ran out of the church, her wedding dress trailing behind her. The villagers gasped, while Henry stood still, watching her leave. The classmates whispered to each other, unsure of what would happen next. Everyone in the church was in shock, even the old man who was about to marry Sophia and the priest. They whispered. What's going on? Sophia's heart was racing as she ran outside, her face burning with shame. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How did they get here? She thought, her mind spinning. She never imagined that a day like this would come. Once the proud daughter of a billionaire, now brought so low. Just then, Emily ran after her, determined to catch up. Stop, Sophia, Emily shouted as she reached the back of the church. Sophia finally stopped, her face wet with tears. She turned, her eyes filled with sadness. How did you all find me? Sophia asked, her voice breaking as more tears rolled down her cheeks. She couldn't hold it in any longer. She sat on the ground, crying as guilt and regret washed over her. Memories flooded her mind. How she had treated Emily and her mother so badly. How she had stolen a necklace and blamed Emily's mom for it when they worked at her old mansion. She also remembered how she had made fun of Henry and bullied her classmates. Now, she wished she could go back in time to fix all the terrible things she had done. Emily knelt closer to Sophia, her heart heavy with sadness. What happened, Sophia? She asked softly, her voice filled with worry. I knew your parents disowned you, but I didn't know things had gotten this bad. Just then, Henry walked up, his footsteps slow and steady. His presence made Sophia's heart sink even lower, and she could barely look at him. Henry had every reason to hate her for all the terrible things she had done in the past, but right now, all she felt was shame. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything I did to you and Emily. Henry didn't say a word. He stood there, silent, his face unreadable. It made Sophia feel even worse. She wondered if he would ever forgive her. Emily, still by her side, looked deeply into Sophia's eyes, her confusion growing. But why are you marrying that old man? She asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. There has to be more to this. Sophia wiped at her tears, her voice trembling as she began to explain. After Mr. Michael and his wife kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. They weren't my real parents, you know. My mom, she worked as a house help in their home. She got pregnant, and the man who got her pregnant disappeared. He never came back. Emily listened closely, her heart aching as she pictured little Sophia growing up without her real father. When I was just 3 years old, my mom died from sickness. I barely remember her, Sophia continued, her eyes far away as if she was lost in the memory. Mr. Michael and his wife felt sorry for me. They adopted me. They gave me everything. Everything a girl like me could ever want. But I don't know why. I kept pushing them away. I was angry, and I didn't know how to stop. I hurt them over and over. Sophia's tears flowed faster now, and she buried her face in her hands. One day, they couldn't take it anymore. I was sent away. I lost everything. Emily, feeling the weight of Sophia's story, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Sophia, she whispered, unsure of what else to say. Sophia sniffled and looked up, her voice shaky. When I came back to the village, I thought someone might help me, but nobody did. Everyone turned their backs on me. I had no friends, no money, nothing. Her voice cracked as she remembered the pain of being alone. And then, the worst thing happened. Emily's eyes widened. What happened? The company that rented me the car I crashed on prom night. They found me. Sophia's voice broke with fear. They arrested me. They said I had to pay for the damages, but I didn't have anything to give them. My grandma, she's the only one who tried to help. She didn't have enough money either, but she did everything she could. The group of classmates standing nearby exchanged uneasy glances, still in shock at how much Sophia had been through. Even Henry's stern expression softened, though he stayed silent. Sophia continued, her voice trembling even more now. Grandma borrowed money from an old farmer. She thought it would help us pay off the car company, but it wasn't enough. We couldn't pay the farmer back, and now he's forcing me to marry him. Emily gasped. What? He's forcing you to marry him? Sophia nodded slowly, her body shaking with each sob. He said if I don't marry him, he'll make sure I go back to jail. I have no choice. She wiped her tear-soaked face, but the tears kept coming. I've tried everything to pay him back, but nothing worked. So I agreed to marry him. Suddenly, The sound of heavy footsteps interrupted the tense moment. The old farmer appeared, his face twisted with anger. "There you are, girl," he shouted, his voice loud and harsh. "What are you doing here, wasting time? You promised to marry me today, and I'm not waiting any longer." Sophia flinched, her whole body trembling as the old man's angry eyes glared down at her. He stepped closer, pointing a rough finger at her. "If you don't marry me right now, I'll have you thrown back in jail. Do you hear me? Come back to the altar now," the old farmer yelled, his voice echoing. "Let's finish this wedding." Sophia stood frozen, tears still on her cheeks. Just as the tension grew, Henry spoke up calmly. "How much is the debt?" The old farmer crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "It's $15,000, he said gruffly, expecting no one to be able to pay that amount. Without hesitation, Henry pulled out his phone and asked for the old man's bank account number. The farmer, surprised but skeptical, gave it to him. Henry transferred the money right there and then. A moment later, the old farmer's phone beeped, and he looked down in shock. "Your debt is paid," he muttered, still in disbelief. "You're free." Everyone stood in stunned silence. Sophia's classmates couldn't believe what had just happened. Henry, the same boy who had been mocked and humiliated by Sophia, had just freed her from her debt. It was as if the world had turned upside down. "Thank you, Henry," Sophia whispered, her voice full of shame and gratitude. But Henry's face remained serious. "Don't thank me yet," he interrupted. "You'll pay me back that money, but in a different way." Sophia's heart skipped a beat, confused by what he meant. "You'll work as a cleaner in my house for 10 months, Henry continued, his voice firm. Sophia froze, her mouth slightly open in shock. "You start next week," Henry said, tossing a piece of paper with his address at her feet. Before she could say another word, Henry turned and walked away, heading toward his car. The rest of the classmates, still in shock, followed him as he drove off. Sophia stood there, her emotions all tangled up inside. She was humiliated, standing alone outside the church, but at the same time, she felt a strange sense of relief. At least she was free from the old farmer's hold. She looked down at the paper with Henry's address and sighed deeply. As the cars disappeared down the road, Sophia wiped her tears, standing in the quiet village, feeling the weight of her past mistakes, but also a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. 1 week later, Sophia packed her bags and headed to Henry's house. She had never felt this nervous before. As the car drove closer, she thought about the Henry she used to know in high school. The one she laughed at, the one she and her friends called fat and ugly. But now, everything was different. When the car stopped in front of the house, Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. Henry's house was huge, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The tall gates, the beautiful flowers in the garden, and the shiny cars parked outside. It all made her feel small. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door, her heart pounding. The door opened, and there he was, Henry. He sat on a soft, expensive-looking couch in a luxurious sitting room. The room sparkled, with big windows letting in sunlight and fancy decorations everywhere. Sophia could hardly believe her eyes. Henry was no longer the boy she made fun of. He was handsome, strong, and confident. "Good afternoon, Henry," she greeted him, her voice shaky. Henry didn't smile. Instead, he looked at her with cold eyes and said, "From now on, don't call me Henry. Call me boss." Sophia's heart sank. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. "Yes, boss," she whispered, feeling embarrassed. Just then, Emily appeared. Emily was Henry's girlfriend now, and she looked beautiful and kind. "Hi, Sophia. Welcome," Emily said with a warm smile. Sophia was surprised by Emily's kindness. She hadn't expected that after everything. Emily helped her with her luggage, showing her to a small but cozy room in the house. As they walked, Emily chatted, trying to make Sophia feel comfortable. But Sophia felt heavy inside, thinking about how her life had turned upside down. Once a proud and spoiled girl, she was now starting her life as a cleaner. The next morning, Sophia woke up early to begin her new job. She scrubbed the floors, cleaned the big windows, and made sure the house looked perfect. It was hard work, and her hands hurt from all the scrubbing, but she kept going. She had no choice. As she worked, she could hear Henry and Emily laughing in another room. Their happiness felt like a sharp reminder of her mistakes. She wiped her forehead and continued cleaning, trying not to think about how different her life was now. Every time Henry passed by, he barely looked at her. He didn't talk to her except to give orders, and when he did, his words were short and cold. Sophia kept her head down and tried to do her job well. But deep down, she knew this was the hardest part. Seeing Henry happy and knowing she had once hurt him. One bright afternoon, Sophia was busy cleaning the stairs when she heard Henry's voice. He had come home, and he wasn't alone. "Sophia," he called. "Yes, boss," she replied, hurrying down the stairs. "Please bring us some juice." Sophia quickly poured a glass of juice and rushed down, careful not to spill. But when she reached the room, she stopped suddenly, her heart pounding. Sitting on the couch was her high school ex-boyfriend. Her first love, the boy she had left just days before prom, telling him he wasn't in her class anymore. Her ex barely seemed to recognize her at first, but then he squinted and softly said, "Sophia?" The glass slipped from Sophia's hands and shattered on the floor. Her face flushed, and filled with shame, she ran. Henry's loud, mocking voice chased after her. "Come back here, Sophia." But she kept going, her heart pounding and her face hot with embarrassment. Sophia rushed into her room, buried her face in her pillow, and cried. She wished she could turn back time, change her past decisions. It hurt so much. She knew now that Henry had invited her ex on purpose, just to make her feel small. Later that evening, as she tried to wipe her tears away, she went to find Henry. With tear-streaked cheeks, she asked him, "Henry, why are you doing this to me? Haven't you hurt me enough?" Henry sneered. "Don't call me Henry. Call me boss," he said coldly. "You're just reaping what you sowed," he added with a cruel smile before walking away, leaving Sophia heartbroken. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Henry didn't ease up on her, not even a little. He seemed to take pleasure in making her life difficult. Every day was a new chore, a new demand, and every day Sophia's heart grew heavier. She scrubbed floors, cleaned windows, did laundry. No task was too small or too grueling. Even on her birthday, she received nothing but a pile of chores. Only Emily, Henny's girlfriend, remembered, giving her a tiny cupcake with a single candle. Sophia smiled through her tears, grateful for the small kindness. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought of her past birthdays. The times her adopted parents would surprise her with gifts, the trips to the beach, the laughter, the love. She longed for those days, for the warmth of their embrace, for the feeling of being cherished. But those days were gone, and all she had now was this cold, empty life under Henry's control. 10 long months had passed since Sophia first stepped into Henry's house as a servant. She'd worked hard every day, quietly doing her tasks, dreaming of the day she could finally leave and start fresh. Now, that day had arrived, and Sophia's heart was a mixture of happiness and fear. She was finally free from the endless work and cold stares. But there was a problem. She had nowhere to go. The thought of returning to the small, lonely village she'd left behind made her heart sink, but she knew she had no other choice. With a heavy sigh, Sophia packed her few belongings, neatly folding her clothes and placing them carefully in her old bag. She looked around her small room one last time, memories flooding her mind. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the living room, where Henry and his girlfriend, Emily, were sitting. She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Thank you, Henry," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm leaving now." Henry looked up, his face surprisingly calm. Emily gave her a small nod and smile, but Henry didn't say anything, which made Sophia feel even more nervous. She turned to leave, clutching her bag tightly. Just as she reached the door, Henry called out, "Sophia." She froze, her heart pounding as she turned around. Henry's tone was soft, almost gentle, which was so unlike him. "We have a surprise for you," he said with a calm voice, his eyes meeting hers. Sophia's heart raced, and she couldn't believe her ears. A surprise? She stood there in shock, wondering what it could be. Henry nodded toward one of the doors in the room and said, "Come out." Sophia's eyes widened as the door slowly opened. And then, stepping out of the shadows, were two people she thought she'd never see again. Her adopted parents. Her mouth fell open. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Mom? Dad?" Without another thought, Sophia dropped her bag and ran to them, her heart bursting with emotions. She hugged them tightly, holding on as if she'd never let go. "I'm so sorry," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I hurt you both. I was so foolish. Please, please find it in your hearts to forgive me." Her voice broke as she sobbed, guilt and relief overwhelming her. Her mother stroked her hair, her own eyes filled with tears. "It's okay, Sophia," she said gently, her voice filled with love. "You did hurt us, but it's all in the past now. We're here for you, and we've missed you every single day." Her father wrapped his arms around her, his face soft with forgiveness. "We love you, Sophia, and we're so happy to have you back," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. Henry watched the reunion, his usual stern expression replaced with something softer, almost warm. He cleared his throat, looking away as if trying to hide his feelings. Sophia, wiping her tears, looked at him in disbelief. It was then that she learned that Henry had gone to her parents, pleading with them to forgive her. He had shown them videos of her working hard around the house, proving how much she had changed. Even though Sophia had hurt Henry in the past, he couldn't bear the thought of her returning to a life of loneliness in that remote village. He wanted something better for her, a chance for her to start anew. Sophia's heart swelled with gratitude and shock. She never thought Henry would go so far for her. Tears welled up in her eyes again as she whispered, "Thank you, Henry. I don't know how to thank you enough." Emily helped Sophia's parents carry her bags to the car, ready to take her home. But just as they were about to drive off, Sophia felt an urge to say one last goodbye. She ran out of the car, her heart full of emotions, and threw her arms around Henry in a tight hug. "Thank you so much, Henry," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Henry, trying to keep his composure, patted her back, his eyes betraying a hint of emotion. "Be a good girl, Sophia," he advised softly, his voice warm. "Take care of yourself." As Sophia got back into the car and they drove away, she watched Henry standing there, a bittersweet smile on his face. She waved to him until he was out of sight, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she was truly going home, not just to her family, but to a new life, filled with hope, forgiveness, and second chances. She had been given a fresh start, and as she looked out at the open road, she knew she would make the most of it. Say no to bullying and yes to kindness. Together, we can make a difference. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from.